Imagine waking up one morning to find that an entire civilization has been wiped from history. Its people, culture, and knowledge all erased. Not by the hands of conquerors, not by war or famine, but by something far more insidious: maps. Maps, you see, are not just tools for navigation. They are power. In the 16th century, a group of secretive cartographers made a decision so chilling it would change the course of history. And this decision has haunted scholars ever since. The lost civilization they erased wasn't a forgotten kingdom or a small tribe. No, it was a thriving, complex culture with a rich history, a story stretching back centuries. They didn't conquer it. They didn't destroy it with violence. They erased it so completely that even today, evidence of its existence is scarce. This is not some abstract theory or lost myth. It is a dark, unsettling truth that continues to unnerve those who uncover it. What do these cartographers know? Why do they go to such lengths to hide an entire civilization from the world? How far did they go to manipulate history? And what does it mean for us today? In this story, we'll uncover the shocking secrets of the cartographers who erased a civilization and why they did it. In the annals of history, there are moments so hidden, so carefully buried beneath the sands of time, that they barely register as whispers in the vast landscape of human memory. But what if some of those moments, those whispers, were not random? What if, instead, they were the result of something far more deliberate, something that was done with intent, with purpose, by people who knew exactly what they were doing? At the heart of our story is a small but incredibly influential group of individuals, the cartographers. These were not the ordinary mapmakers who crafted their charts in the light of day, sharing their knowledge with the world. No, these were shadowy figures who worked under a cloak of secrecy, their motives far darker than mere exploration or geography. They had the power to shape the world itself, and they chose to erase it. The cartographers of the 16th century were bound together by a singular, chilling secret, a secret that they knew could destroy not just a civilization, but the entire narrative of history. The civilization they erased wasn't one we think of as lost. It wasn't one that disappeared because of a war or plague or even the ravages of time. This was a civilization wiped clean from existence, not by the ravages of nature, but by deliberate, calculated action. And it was done with a stroke of ink. The decision was made in the darkness of secret meetings, away from the prying eyes of the public. These were not men seeking fortune, nor were they part of any governmental body that would need to answer for their actions. They were cartographers, experts in the craft of mapmaking, but with the power to do so much more. They could erase borders, redraw nations, and make something real disappear without a trace. And they did. It all began with a single question: what happens when a civilization threatens the established order? This civilization, one that thrived for centuries, had knowledge and culture that were, by the standards of the time, dangerous. Dangerous not because of its people, nor its wealth, but because of its understanding of the world. Their maps, their archives, contained truths that challenged the power structures of the time. And the cartographers, working under the shadow of kings and secretive societies, could not allow that to stand. In the quiet offices of royal courts, and in the dim-lit rooms of hidden societies, a plan was formed. A plan to make sure that this civilization, its people, its knowledge, its entire existence, was erased from the world's memory. They didn't burn cities, nor did they leave ruins behind. They simply drew it out of existence. They created maps that left no trace. As the maps began to circulate across Europe, and later across the world, something extraordinary happened. The civilization, once a vibrant part of the global landscape, disappeared. It wasn't just forgotten, it was made to never have existed. And this map, this deliberate lie, was held up as the truth. But why? Why did these men, whose job it was to chart the world, choose to destroy a piece of it instead? The answer, it seems, lies in the history of the world itself. There was a force more powerful than even the most careful mapmaker's hand: fear. fear of a truth too dangerous to spread, a truth that could shake the very foundations of the powers that ruled the world, fear that the civilization, if allowed to continue, would change everything. And so it was erased. In the world of history, few mysteries are more disturbing than the sudden disappearance of an entire civilization. One moment, they are thriving, growing, evolving, contributing to the world in ways that would eventually shape entire continents. The next, they're gone. And not just gone in the conventional sense. No, this civilization didn't just collapse. It was made to vanish. To understand what happened, we must first look at the civilization itself. It wasn't some obscure, insignificant society. This was a culture rich in knowledge, art, and power. Located in a region of the world that was considered the crossroads of civilizations, it had advanced technologies, philosophies, and even an understanding of the natural world that far surpassed many of its contemporaries. But what made it so dangerous wasn't its power or its resources, it was its knowledge. At the heart of this civilization was an intricate system of maps and geographical data that had the potential to rewrite the entire history of the known world. Their understanding of land, sea, and the connections between them was far more advanced than anything that existed at the time. The civilization was a beacon of intellectual achievement, and yet they were a threat. The ancient archives of this society, hidden in the mountains and in ruins now lost to time, contained records that could challenge the way the world was structured, everything from the locations of long-forgotten kingdoms to the trade routes that stretched far beyond the borders of the known world. This knowledge was too precious, too powerful. It was a threat to the carefully constructed narratives of the kingdoms and empires that controlled the maps of the time. So, it had to be erased. But the methods of erasure were not brutal. No, this was a subtle war, one waged on paper. The records were systematically erased, the landmarks wiped away, the cities replaced with empty space. The civilization's very existence was redrawn out of existence, like a pencil line erased from a page. In its place were new lands, new borders, and new histories, ones that suited the needs of the empire and the cartographers who served them. And thus, the civilization disappeared. But it didn't disappear completely. No, there are whispers. A few scattered accounts remain, small traces of this once great civilization that refused to be completely erased. These whispers survive in myths, legends, and half-remembered tales of lost cities and ancient secrets. They can be found in the cryptic notations of old maps, and in the accounts of explorers who stumbled upon ruins that should not have been there. Yet, no one knew where to look, and no one had the power to uncover the truth. Why then do these stories persist? Why do some of these maps survive? Could it be that the civilization was truly forgotten, or were there forces at work, even in modern times, ensuring that the truth remained buried? In the next chapter, we will begin to uncover the first clues, the first inkling of the civilization's true existence, and see how the cartographer's greatest lie might have been their most difficult to uphold. What does it take to erase an entire civilization from history? What kind of minds would even consider doing such a thing, knowing the weight of their actions would alter the course of time forever? For the cartographers who made this choice, it wasn't an easy decision. There was a dilemma, a haunting question that lingered in the corners of their minds. Could erasing a civilization truly be justified? These men were not just mapmakers. They were the gatekeepers of information, the custodians of geographical knowledge. The world, as they knew it, was a fragile thing, built on a network of stories, beliefs, and borders that kept empires in check. But in the 16th century, when knowledge was still power and maps were the ultimate form of that power, they faced a choice that would forever haunt them. The civilization they were tasked with erasing wasn't some barbaric tribe or small, isolated community. It was a deeply sophisticated society, one whose understanding of the world was ahead of its time. The more they learned about the civilization, the more they realized how dangerous it could be to the existing power structures. Their maps and knowledge were not just mundane records. They were dangerous blueprints for changing the global order. These cartographers were employed by powerful entities, rulers, monarchs, and wealthy patrons who understood the value of controlling history. What these rulers didn't understand, however, was the full scope of what they were asking for. They weren't simply asking for a few towns to be omitted or some minor settlements to be forgotten. They were asking for the very fabric of history to be rewritten. It was a task that weighed heavily on the cartographers' consciences, for in their hands lay the power to change the truth forever. As they debated the morality of this decision, they came to a chilling realization. The act of erasure, though morally troubling, was not just for their time. It was for the future. The rulers who demanded it feared that, if this civilization's knowledge came to light, it could inspire others. Its ideas could challenge the status quo, and its people could rise up in defiance of empires built on their own manipulation of history. So, they were tasked with a mission that was not just political, but existential. They had to ensure that this civilization was wiped from existence in such a way that it would never be rediscovered, an undertaking that involved not just erasing maps, but erasing any trace of their culture, their art, and their very essence. And as the cartographers considered the magnitude of what they were being asked to do, they understood this was a one-way path. Once it was done, there would be no going back. It was not a matter of wiping away a few errors on a map. No, this was about crafting a new reality where the civilization had never existed at all, where no one could challenge the current powers. The dilemma was clear. Would they remain loyal to their craft, their knowledge, and their conscience? Or would they bow to the pressures of those who held power, erasing a people who had done nothing but live and thrive? As the weight of this decision pressed on them, something else began to take shape, the tools of erasure. These cartographers didn't just hide their maps. They created new ones. Maps that altered the land itself, changed coastlines, destroyed mountains, and reshaped rivers. With one stroke, they could remove entire cities, entire cultures, and entire ways of life. What drove them to take such drastic steps? Fear? Greed? Or perhaps a mix of both? As we dive deeper into the secret meetings and hidden agendas of these cartographers, we'll uncover just how far they went to ensure that the world never knew the truth. The civilization that the cartographers sought to erase was not merely a cultural footnote. It was a beacon of knowledge, a society that had discovered truths about the world that would be considered revolutionary even by modern standards. The cartographers' fear of this civilization wasn't just rooted in its political power or wealth. It lay in the knowledge it possessed, a knowledge that could challenge the very foundations of the world's power structures. This civilization's understanding of geography, astronomy, and even mathematics was light years ahead of its time. Its maps were more than just accurate representations of land and sea. They were intricately designed, with symbols and codes that hinted at a deeper, almost forbidden knowledge. Some of these maps contained routes to lands that were considered impossible to reach, hidden passageways in oceans, and locations that defied the known laws of geography. But what was most dangerous to those in power was not what was depicted on these maps. It was what the maps represented. The civilization had a unique way of perceiving the world. They understood the interconnectedness of nature, the movements of celestial bodies, and the underlying forces that shaped the planet. Their knowledge of the stars, the way they mapped the heavens, was so advanced that it foreshadowed discoveries that wouldn't be made for centuries. And it didn't stop there. There were hints, coded in their ancient texts and maps, that suggested they had knowledge of technologies and innovations that would forever change the course of humanity. But the real danger, it seemed, was in the way this civilization approached the world's rulers. They didn't view power as something to be fought for in the traditional sense. They believed in the transformative power of knowledge, an idea that threatened to undermine the very essence of established authority. For the rulers who depended on control, maintaining a monopoly over knowledge was essential to their reign. If this civilization's ideas were allowed to spread, it could inspire uprisings, revolutions, or worse, global shifts in power that threatened their very existence. And so, the decision was made. The civilization, with all its dangerous knowledge, had to be erased. But it wasn't just the people that had to be wiped from history. It was their ideas, their maps, their very contributions to science and culture. These cannot be allowed to survive. The task of erasure was not straightforward. The cartographers had to carefully scour every existing map, every document, every trace of the civilization's existence from the historical record. They had to destroy not only the physical artifacts, but also the memory of the civilization itself. The more they dug, the more they found traces of their ideas scattered across continents, hidden in the margins of ancient texts, buried deep within the archives of royal courts. And so, the cartographers became historians of destruction. With each map they altered, each location they erased, they were not just redrawing the world. They were changing the way history itself would be told. What was once a bustling metropolis on the banks of a great river was now a nameless expanse of land. What were once thriving trade routes were now labeled as uninhabited wastelands. The civilizations, the cities, the innovations, they were all gone, wiped away without a trace. But even as they erased the civilization's knowledge from the maps, something strange began to happen. Whispers of their discoveries, their maps, and their ideas refused to be silenced. Old explorers, curious minds, and even rival cartographers began to question the missing pieces of history. Why was there a gap in the maps where once a flourishing empire had existed? What happened to the ancient texts that spoke of lands that no longer appeared on any map? The knowledge had not disappeared. It had merely been buried. As the cartographers worked, they began to realize something chilling. The very act of erasure might not be enough to rid the world of the civilization's dangerous knowledge. The maps may have been altered, but the civilization's ideas had already begun to take root in the minds of those who had encountered them. Some of the world's most influential explorers, scientists, and thinkers were unknowingly carrying pieces of the forbidden knowledge in their minds. The knowledge wasn't gone. It was only waiting to be rediscovered. The cartographers weren't acting alone. Behind them, veiled in secrecy and influence, stood a powerful, clandestine group, one whose motives stretched far beyond simple cartography. This secret council, an assembly of the world's most influential and shadowy figures, had orchestrated the campaign to erase the civilization. Their membership was a well-guarded secret, and their power reached into the very heart of monarchies, trading empires, and ruling dynasties. The council's origins were shrouded in mystery, but it was widely believed that it was formed from a coalition of powerful individuals who saw the knowledge of the erased civilization as a direct threat to their authority. These individuals were not just scholars or rulers. They were the gatekeepers of global influence, the architects of world history, and the guardians of a system that had existed for centuries. At the heart of the council's decision-making was a fear of the unknown, a fear that knowledge, once shared, would break the very foundation of their power. The erased civilization's maps, archives, and philosophies posed an existential threat to the current political and social systems that kept the world's elite in power. What if the civilization's advanced understanding of geography, trade routes, and the natural world became accessible to the masses? What if their revolutionary ideas about governance and societal structure inspired uprisings against the established order? The council's role was clear: ensure that the civilization was wiped from the historical record completely, its influence extinguished before it could reach the masses. This was not a decision made lightly. It was a carefully calculated maneuver by individuals who understood the fragility of power and the lengths they would need to go to preserve it. At the time, these men and women were considered the most learned of their era, with vast networks of influence that spanned continents. Some were aristocrats, others were merchants, and some were high-ranking officials within religious and governmental institutions. But they all shared a singular goal: to control the narrative of history itself. For years, the council met in secret, hidden from public view, crafting and implementing plans to ensure the civilization's erasure. They knew that cartographers were the ideal agents for this task. Maps were seen as the ultimate expression of authority. They didn't just represent territory, they shaped perceptions. A well-drawn map could alter the course of exploration, shift the balance of power, and even redefine reality itself. By controlling the maps, the council could control the story. And that was what they intended to do, rewrite history. Their work, however, wasn't just about erasing the maps. It was about controlling information. As the council manipulated the records, they placed strategic lies in the historical narrative, misleading future generations about the existence of the civilization. They planted false accounts, fabricated myths, and spread disinformation about the lands and people that had once thrived. The council's influence was not limited to geography. They also controlled the flow of knowledge in universities, libraries, and intellectual circles. If someone stumbled upon a clue, a forbidden manuscript, or an ancient text, the council's agents were quick to swoop in, confiscating or discrediting the source. The goal was simple: keep the truth from ever resurfacing. But even as the council worked tirelessly, there were signs that their efforts weren't entirely successful. Certain documents survived the purge, slipping through the cracks and finding their way into the hands of curious minds. Some of the world's most famous explorers, artists, and scholars unknowingly came into contact with fragments of the civilization's lost knowledge. These pieces were small at first: an unusual symbol on an ancient map, a passage in a forgotten journal, or a strange set of coordinates that didn't align with any known location. But over time, these fragments began to tell a story that the council feared would one day be revealed. And so, the council's grip on history began to slip bit by bit, despite their best efforts. The civilization, it seemed, was not as easily erased as they had hoped. Their knowledge was too powerful, too profound, to remain buried forever. But the council's work was not over. With each discovery, they had to tighten their control even more, ensuring that the truth was not exposed. They could not allow the world to know the full scope of the civilization's existence. They could not afford to let their power slip away. As the years passed, the council's influence waned, but their secret work continued in the shadows, like a buried thread pulling at the fabric of history. The world moved on. Empires rose, kings reigned, and explorers ventured into unknown territories. But in the background, something strange was happening. The civilization, which had been wiped from the maps and erased from historical texts, was not truly gone. It had simply vanished from the surface of history, relegated to the shadows where only the most daring minds dared to look. But despite the council's best efforts, the gaps they left behind, the missing cities, the unexplained territories, and the inconsistent records began to take on a life of their own. There were whispers. Scholars who didn't quite understand why the ancient records didn't align, why certain places seemed to disappear overnight, or why the historical accounts of voyages and trade routes never quite matched up. And then there were the explorers, the adventurers who had heard rumors of a lost city hidden in the wilderness or a trade route that had been mysteriously forgotten. They began to uncover clues, small hints of a forgotten past, buried deep beneath the layers of time. The first major breakthrough came in the form of an ancient map, one that had long been considered a mere artifact, a curiosity. It showed the outline of a city that no one could recognize, a place that didn't appear on any modern map. The map had been dismissed for centuries, its origin unclear and its accuracy doubted. But something about it seemed different. The cartographer who had made the map, it turned out, had once been a part of the secret council. His work was meticulous, and the map's details were so precise that they seemed to suggest a deeper knowledge of the world than was publicly acknowledged at the time. The more historians and geographers studied this mysterious map, the more they began to realize that it was not an anomaly. It was a trail, a breadcrumb leading back to the lost civilization. The city depicted on the map was not a figment of the cartographer's imagination. It was real, but it was also a city that had been deliberately erased, replaced with an empty expanse of wilderness in later versions of the maps. Over time, more and more explorers came across similar clues: strange landmarks in forgotten journals, references to cities that had no historical record, and odd discrepancies in trade routes. These discoveries seemed to confirm what had long been suspected. The civilization had not simply disappeared. It had been made to vanish. But why? The answer, it seemed, lay in the powerful forces behind the council. The erasure wasn't just about removing a civilization from the historical record. It was about controlling the flow of knowledge, about ensuring that certain ideas and technologies never made it into the hands of those who might use them to challenge the world's power structures. But the further these explorers dug, the more they realized the gravity of their discoveries. The city, the civilization, had not been erased completely. It was merely dormant, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to uncover its secrets. The council had done their work well, erasing the obvious markers of the civilization's existence. But they had underestimated one thing: curiosity. It was the curiosity of scholars, adventurers, and historians that would eventually undo their work. The human drive to understand the past, to seek out the truth, would not be silenced. As the pieces began to fall into place, a dark realization set in. The civilization wasn't just erased from the maps. It had been buried under layers of deception. Every historian who had been taught about the rise and fall of empires had been told a lie. Every explorer who had been taught the truth of the world's geography had been handed a distorted version of reality. And all the while, the civilization's knowledge and legacy had been waiting to be rediscovered. But the question remained: what would happen if the truth was revealed? Would the world be able to accept the shocking discovery of a civilization that had been hidden for so long? Would it change the course of history? Or would the forces that once erased it succeed in burying it forever? The answers lay just ahead, hidden in the depths of history, waiting for those bold enough to seek them. As whispers of a lost civilization turned into the beginnings of a revelation, a growing number of researchers and explorers became obsessed with uncovering its secrets. Some had stumbled upon curious maps and ancient texts, while others had ventured into remote, dangerous landscapes, chasing the ghost of a forgotten city. It was the discovery of an old, rusted journal, its pages yellowed with age, that would lead to the next breakthrough. The journal belonged to an explorer who had long been lost to history. It had been passed down through generations, but its true contents had remained hidden, dismissed as the ramblings of a man driven mad by the isolation of his journeys. But when it was finally opened, it revealed something extraordinary. The explorer, it seemed, had ventured into an uncharted region of the world, far beyond the known territories. And what he had found was a city, one that mirrored the city depicted in the mysterious map uncovered years before. This journal, once dismissed as mere fantasy, contained detailed descriptions of the city's architecture, its technological advancements, and most importantly, its knowledge that seemed too advanced for its time. The explorer had described massive stone structures that housed vast libraries of information, some of which seemed to challenge the very understanding of science, geography, and history that was accepted in Europe at the time. But what really made the journal stand out were the last few pages. In his final entries, the explorer wrote that he had uncovered a secret hidden beneath the city, a secret that, if revealed, would forever alter the course of history. He had written about ancient devices that seemed to harness the power of the earth itself, technologies that could change the way humanity interacted with the natural world. But before he could share these discoveries with the world, the explorer had mysteriously vanished. His disappearance, along with the strange disappearance of other explorers who ventured into the same region, was dismissed as coincidence. But the journal left one undeniable truth: the civilization existed, and not just in the past, but in the present, buried beneath layers of history and lies. The journal's contents were soon passed into the hands of scholars and geographers, who eagerly began to decode its mysteries. They found that the explorer had left behind intricate maps of the region, which matched the locations of the civilization's cities and landmarks, places that had long since disappeared from modern records. As they compared these maps to the maps altered by the council centuries before, they found that the erased cities still existed, hidden in plain sight. They were not lost. They had been deliberately hidden, concealed by the very maps that were meant to guide the world. But as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, something much darker began to emerge. The maps, the journals, the artifacts, they all pointed to something more than just a lost city. They pointed to a global conspiracy, a plan to erase a civilization that, if allowed to rise again, could challenge the foundations of the world itself. And in this moment, the full weight of the Council's decision came crashing down. They hadn't just erased a city or a group of people. They had erased an entire way of understanding the world, one that could change everything. The rediscovery of this civilization, while thrilling, also posed a terrifying question. What had the Council known? What had they feared? Why had they gone to such extreme lengths to bury the truth? And more importantly, who was still out there, actively working to keep these secrets hidden? The answers, it seemed, were closer than anyone could have imagined. It was one thing to uncover fragments, to glimpse the edges of something long hidden. But as the rediscovery of this lost civilization gained momentum, it became clear that the full erasure wasn't just a matter of misplaced maps or forgotten cities. It was systematic. From the highest echelons of power, a concerted effort had been made to ensure that no one would ever remember this civilization. As historians began to connect the dots, they stumbled upon the first major clue, an oddly pristine map dated centuries ago that depicted a vast network of cities, rivers, and trade routes that no longer existed. This map had been labeled as an early attempt at world geography, its details too accurate to be considered a mere abstraction. Yet within just a few years it had been replaced. The civilization it had once showcased was erased, entirely replaced with blank spaces or marked as uninhabited. The process of erasure wasn't just about drawing new borders or changing names. It was more insidious than that. It was about discrediting any knowledge of the civilization. All written records, whether they were oral traditions, written manuscripts, or even artifacts, were systematically destroyed, burned, or hidden. The goal wasn't to just remove the physical traces of a culture. It was to erase the very idea of it. It wasn't long before the Council realized that they weren't just fighting a battle over maps. They were fighting a war over information itself. The maps, the archives, the scholarly texts, they were the physical representations of power. To control the past, to shape history in their own image, the Council had to control the narrative. So, they went to extreme lengths to manipulate it. Libraries were emptied. Monasteries that housed ancient manuscripts were raided. Rare maps, which would have served as undeniable proof of the civilization's existence, were stolen and locked away in secret vaults, never to see the light of day. Even as the maps were being erased, the scholars who once studied the civilization's contributions to science and philosophy were discredited. Any work that questioned the mainstream narrative was either destroyed or dismissed as heretical. The more the Council worked to eliminate the records, the more they worked to ensure that no one would ever question their control of the world's knowledge. But the erasure wasn't confined to Europe. As the colonial powers expanded into the Americas, Africa, and Asia, the Council ensured that no traces of the civilization would be found in their new territories. They instructed explorers to look the other way, to ignore any evidence of advanced civilizations that didn't fit into the accepted narrative of human progress. If anything was found, it was quickly hushed up or explained away as primitive, or worse, as mere myth. Yet, even in the face of such monumental efforts, something curious began to happen. Stories of the lost civilization began to emerge, despite all attempts to silence them. The ideas that had once threatened to change the global order weren't entirely extinguished. They found new forms, new voices. The knowledge wasn't gone. It had simply been pushed underground. And as the maps were rewritten, as the books were burned, and as the scholars were silenced, the truth of what the Council had done began to become clear. They had not just erased a civilization. They had ensured that humanity itself would never fully understand what had been lost. The civilization's knowledge had not disappeared. It had been buried, its power deferred, waiting for someone to dig it up again. The question now was, who would find it? Maps. They are, at their core, more than mere tools for navigation. They shape our understanding of the world, determine borders, influence trade routes, and often control the flow of power. Maps define what exists and, equally important, what does not exist. They have the ability to mold our perception of the world, our history, our geography, and even our future. But as the case of this lost civilization reveals, maps can also be used to erase everything that came before them. The power of maps goes beyond their use in daily life. Maps are often the very instruments through which empires claim dominion. The act of drawing a line across a map can define a nation's borders, and with those borders come wealth, resources, and control. But this power can be wielded in darker ways, as was the case with the civilization that was erased from history. The cartographers understood this power intimately. They knew that history was not written solely with words or books, but with maps, carefully constructed, meticulously drawn, and strategically distributed. When the council made the decision to erase this civilization, it wasn't enough to destroy written records or burn buildings. They knew that if they didn't control the maps, their erasure would be incomplete. Maps were the final frontier of control. It was a strategy that worked remarkably well. Maps are sacred in their own way. For centuries, the world relied on them as truth, as irrefutable evidence of the world's physical structure. If a civilization didn't appear on a map, it was as if it never existed. And so, over time, as the erased civilization vanished from the world's maps, it vanished from collective memory. Generations of scholars, explorers, and cartographers would continue to add to this false narrative. New maps were drawn, and in each one, the civilization was more firmly erased. But it wasn't just about erasing the cities or the borders of this lost civilization. It was about manipulating reality itself. The decision to erase this civilization didn't just remove it from maps. It changed the course of history. Ideas that the civilization had discovered or developed were also erased from the collective memory. Their advances in science, technology, and philosophy became footnotes in history books, written off as irrelevant or unattainable. The erasure wasn't just geographic, it was intellectual. And yet, despite this attempt to completely erase all traces of their existence, the civilization's ideas, symbols, and innovations didn't vanish entirely. Like seeds buried in the soil, these ideas began to sprout again in small, unexpected ways. But they were hidden, scattered, and distorted. Researchers and explorers who were curious enough to dig deeper uncovered strange anomalies. Maps that didn't align with the accepted global geography, historical accounts that didn't match the current narrative, and odd architectural remnants that suggested a lost and forgotten past. The mystery of this erased civilization was not just about finding their cities or their artifacts. It was about reclaiming their knowledge, the knowledge that had been stolen and hidden from the world. This knowledge had been suppressed for centuries, but now, in the present day, it was beginning to surface, one discovery at a time. The most chilling part of the erasure was not just that it had happened, but that it had been carried out so effectively. The maps had done their job. For centuries, they told a story that was not true, one where this civilization had never existed. And yet, as the search for their lost knowledge deepens, it becomes increasingly clear. Maps may be powerful, but they are not permanent. History is written by those who seek it. The question now is, what will happen when the world finally accepts the truth? What will change when these hidden truths are brought into the light? In the secretive corners of history, where power and knowledge intersect, there is often a moment when decisions are made that shape the course of everything that follows. For the cartographers who erased the civilization, that moment came in a darkened room, far from the eyes of the public. It wasn't an impulsive choice. It was a calculated decision that, once made, would reverberate through time. At the heart of this decision was an unspoken fear, a fear of the unknown, of knowledge so powerful that it could shake the foundations of the world's most powerful empires. This civilization, with its advanced maps, astronomical observations, and revolutionary theories about governance, was a direct threat to the established order. The council had seen the potential of this civilization's ideas, and it was too dangerous to allow them to spread. What the cartographers had to decide was simple. Either the knowledge of this civilization was erased from history, or the balance of power would be forever changed. The decision to erase the civilization was not made lightly. The council was composed of influential figures, powerful monarchs, wealthy merchants, high-ranking church officials, and secretive scholars, each of whom held a piece of the world's power. They understood that to control history was to control the future. By erasing the civilization, they would be protecting the current power structure, ensuring that the old ways of domination and control remained unchallenged. It wasn't just about geography or politics. It was about ideas. The civilization's understanding of the natural world, their innovations in science and technology, and their revolutionary approach to governance represented a direct challenge to the status quo. The council realized that if this civilization's knowledge spread, it could inspire revolutions, upheavals, and new ways of thinking that threatened to dismantle the carefully constructed world they had built. Thus, the decision was made to erase them from the world's memory. Maps were redrawn, historical records were altered, and the civilization was expunged from the collective consciousness. The cartographers who carried out this task were well aware of the gravity of what they were doing. They weren't just erasing a civilization. They were erasing the potential for a new world order. It was a decision that would haunt them, but at the time, it seemed necessary. The council had made its choice, but as with all decisions made in the shadows, there were unintended consequences. The civilization's erasure didn't just suppress its knowledge. It created a void, a space in history where something was missing. And where there is a void, there is always the potential for something to slip through the cracks. As centuries passed, whispers of the lost civilization began to surface. Some of the world's greatest minds began to question the official narratives, discovering anomalies in the maps, the historical records, and the scientific advancements that seemed to suggest a hidden truth. But by then, the decision of the council had been sealed. The civilization's disappearance had been so thorough that few believed it was anything more than a legend or myth. And yet, the more these anomalies were discovered, the more the realization grew. The council's decision had not been as permanent as they had hoped. The knowledge of the lost civilization had been buried, yes, but it had never truly disappeared. It had only been waiting to be rediscovered. As researchers and explorers began to piece together the fragments of this forgotten past, they started to understand the full scope of the council's actions. The civilization had not just been erased from the maps, they had been erased from history itself. And in doing so, the council had created a mystery that would last for centuries, one that would eventually unravel and reveal the shocking truth behind their decision. But the question still remains, was the council right to make this choice? Could the civilization's knowledge have been safely integrated into the world, or was it truly too dangerous? And what happens now, as the truth begins to surface, threatening to unearth the legacy of those who sought to bury it? As the story of the lost civilization began to emerge from the shadows, it became clear that the council's decision to erase its existence was not a simple matter of removing cities from a map. The deeper historians dug, the more they uncovered, a web of lies carefully spun over centuries, designed not just to obscure a civilization's existence, but to twist the very narrative of history itself. At first, these lies seemed harmless enough, small inconsistencies in ancient texts, odd references to mysterious lands that didn't match any known geography, strange phrases in explorers' diaries that had been ignored or misunderstood. But as more of these anomalies were discovered, it became increasingly obvious that they were not just mistakes or coincidences. They were deliberate fabrications, planted into the historical record by those who had the power to shape the past. The first major discovery came when researchers found a collection of royal decrees issued by monarchs who were believed to have been contemporaries of the erased civilization. These decrees, once thought to be straightforward records of governance and trade, were filled with references to strange geographical locations, places that did not appear on any map, places that the cartographers had intentionally removed. These records weren't just vague mentions of distant lands. They contained detailed descriptions of advanced cities, vast trade networks, and technologies that were centuries ahead of their time. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was a series of texts written by scholars who had been commissioned to reorganize historical knowledge. These scholars, who had worked in the service of the council, had been tasked with rewriting the history books, creating a narrative where the erased civilization never existed. They were the architects of the grand lie, the ones who planted the seeds of misinformation that would grow into the accepted version of history. What made these documents so chilling wasn't just their content. It was the lengths to which the council had gone to suppress the truth. They didn't just create false accounts. They altered the way the world viewed knowledge itself. They promoted the idea that the lost civilization's achievements were either a hoax or a figment of imagination. They discredited anyone who spoke of it, painting them as delusional or politically dangerous. Anyone who even mentioned the civilization was labeled a heretic or a revolutionary, silenced by the sheer weight of the false narrative. The trail of lies didn't stop with the written word. The council also orchestrated the suppression of physical evidence. Ancient artifacts, once thought to be mere curiosities, were stolen, destroyed, or hidden in vaults where no one would ever see them. When explorers or scholars uncovered evidence of the lost civilization, it was quickly confiscated. The very idea that such a civilization had existed was scrubbed from the public consciousness. As researchers began to piece together the true story, they found that the lies were not confined to a single time period or region. They had been woven into the very fabric of world history. From ancient Greece to medieval Europe, from the Americas to the Far East, the lie had spread. It was a global conspiracy, a coordinated effort to keep the world in the dark about a civilization that, if rediscovered, could have changed everything. But there were those who refused to accept the lie. Scholars, historians, and adventurers who sought the truth began to speak out, calling attention to the discrepancies, the contradictions, and the missing pieces of history. These brave individuals risked their careers, their reputations, and sometimes their lives to expose the falsehoods that had been propagated for centuries. And as they did, the mystery deepened. The more they uncovered, the more it became apparent that the council's erasure had been more than just an act of censorship. It was an act of control, an attempt to create a version of history that suited the needs of the powerful. But in doing so, the council had underestimated the resilience of truth. The lies they had woven into history were beginning to unravel. The question now wasn't just about uncovering the civilization's secrets. It was about confronting the lies that had been told for centuries and asking the uncomfortable question, who benefits from these lies? And how far would the council, and its modern-day descendants, go to ensure that the truth never sees the light of day? The discovery of the lies was just the beginning. The most powerful evidence of the lost civilization's existence was not in dusty scrolls or ancient ruins, but in the maps that had been carefully hidden away for centuries. These maps were not like the ones we use today, with simple lines and names of countries. No, these maps were works of art, intricately detailed, revealing more than just geography. They revealed the very essence of the world as it once was. What made these maps so dangerous wasn't just their accuracy or the knowledge they contained. It was the fact that they didn't match the narrative that had been created. These maps, drawn by cartographers who had worked for the council, showed territories, cities, and landmarks that had been erased from modern maps. They were filled with regions that had been crossed out or completely erased, places where the erased civilization once thrived. But these maps were not widely known. After the council had completed their task, they took every effort to hide these dangerous documents. They locked them away in private vaults, buried them in forgotten libraries, and even destroyed some, ensuring that only a select few had access to them. Some of the most detailed maps were smuggled into secret collections, hidden in remote locations where they could never be found by prying eyes. The maps themselves were far more than just records of places. They contained subtle markings, symbols, annotations, and clues that hinted at the civilization's advanced knowledge. These markings didn't just describe locations. They spoke of trade routes, ancient technologies, and even astronomical alignments that had been wiped from public knowledge. It was clear from the maps that the civilization had not only been a thriving, powerful entity, it had also understood the world in ways that defied modern science. But even as the Council attempted to erase these maps, some were preserved, passed down through secret channels. Some were rediscovered by chance, as researchers stumbled upon private collections or archives thought to be lost forever. Each map was a key, a piece of the puzzle that pointed to the forgotten truth. The most revealing map of all was found in the vaults of an old, defunct university, hidden beneath layers of dust and bureaucracy. It was unlike any map known to the modern world, a map of the entire globe, but with vast swathes of land marked in strange, cryptic symbols. The erased civilization had left behind an incredible legacy in this map, its territories, cities, and even its knowledge still alive on the page. What shocked the discoverers of this map wasn't just its precision or the fact that it lined up perfectly with the ancient texts they had uncovered. It was the sheer audacity of the erasure. Whoever had created this map knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't just a matter of removing the civilization from a map. They had attempted to remove all traces of it from history itself. The map's creators had even gone so far as to mislabel entire continents, twist the courses of rivers, and change the locations of key landmarks, so thoroughly that anyone looking at it would believe the erased civilization had never existed. And yet, the map remained. It was a defiant relic of a past that refused to be erased. For those brave enough to look, the map spoke volumes. It was a testament to the power of knowledge and the lengths to which those in power would go to suppress it. The more researchers examined it, the more they realized these maps were not just geographic tools. They were blueprints for a world that could have been, a world where the erased civilization thrived alongside others, shaping the course of history. As the maps were pieced together, it became clear that the civilization's influence had been far more widespread than anyone had imagined. Their knowledge had touched every corner of the globe. Their trade routes had connected continents, and their ideas had seeped into the foundations of other cultures. The more maps that were uncovered, the more this hidden history was revealed. But these maps weren't just artifacts of the past. They were a warning. They showed a world that had been reshaped by the Council's actions, a world where truth had been manipulated to maintain control. The erasure of the civilization wasn't just a historical event. It was a lesson in the power of information and how it can be used to rewrite the very fabric of reality. The maps, in all their intricate detail, stood as a testament to a world that might have been forgotten forever. But now, they were the key to understanding the past and revealing the truth that had been hidden for so long. The lost civilization, it seemed, was never truly gone. It had merely been exiled, its knowledge buried beneath layers of deception and manipulation. But now, the question remained, would the world ever be ready to accept the truth? And more importantly, who would control the narrative once it was revealed? As the rediscovery of the lost civilization progressed, the overwhelming truth was undeniable. The civilization had been deliberately erased, not just from maps, but from history itself. It wasn't simply an act of geographical censorship. It was a full-scale rewriting of history, a manipulation of the very past that shaped the present. This was the moment when the real horror of the Council's actions became clear. They had not just removed a civilization from maps. They had erased it from the collective human memory. The process of falsifying history didn't just involve altering maps or destroying artifacts. It was a deep, intricate operation to rewrite entire chronicles of the past, to ensure that no one would ever question the historical narrative that had been established by the powerful elite. Scholars who tried to delve into the civilization's history were silenced, their work discredited, their findings dismissed as fantasy or error. These individuals, historians, archaeologists, and explorers, were painted as unreliable, even dangerous, to the established order. But it wasn't just scholars who were affected. The public, for generations, had been fed a false history. Textbooks, public speeches, and official records all reflected the same narrative. The civilization was a myth, a mirage of the past that had never truly existed. Even the most well-known figures of history were rewired to fit into this new framework. Kings, explorers, and emperors who may have once interacted with the lost civilization were recast as having either never known of it or, if they did, having dismissed it as irrelevant. The civilization that had once stood as a beacon of knowledge and progress was now nothing more than a footnote in the dustbin of history. But the council didn't stop at erasing the civilization from the historical record. They went further. They planted deliberate lies in the annals of history to ensure that future generations would never come close to the truth. These lies were crafted with care, planted in works of literature, official histories, and royal decrees. The lies were subtle, woven into the fabric of history in such a way that, when taken at face value, they seemed as though they had always been part of the narrative. One such lie was the claim that the civilization had been primitive, an argument used by the council to discredit the civilization's remarkable advancements. The idea that the civilization had been savage or unorganized was planted into the public psyche, ensuring that no one would ever take its achievements seriously. Historical records painted a picture of a civilization that had failed, that had never reached the heights of what later empires achieved. These claims were convenient, for they justified the erasure. The civilization, it seemed, had never been a threat at all. But as the historical records were painstakingly examined, it became clear these lies were just that, fabrications. The civilization had not failed, it had thrived. And it was not primitive, it was sophisticated with knowledge that rivaled, and in some cases surpassed, the most advanced cultures of the time. The lies also served another purpose, covering up the actions of the council itself. The more the world believed in these false narratives, the easier it was for the council's manipulations to remain hidden. The council's efforts to erase the civilization were not simply acts of political control. They were acts of self-preservation. If the truth came to light, the council's own culpability in the civilization's destruction would be exposed. The fabrications were a shield, protecting not only the powers that be, but also the architects of the erasure who had orchestrated it from the shadows. But even as the lies spread, a small group of scholars and explorers, those brave enough to question the narrative, began to notice the inconsistencies, the cracks in the official story. They began to uncover the gaps where the truth had been intentionally hidden. The more they dug, the more they realized the history that had been taught to generations was a carefully constructed illusion. The most unsettling part of this discovery was the realization that the false history didn't just affect the lost civilization. It had also altered the way the world understood the past. By erasing this civilization, the council had reshaped the world's understanding of history, geography, and even philosophy. They had not just erased one civilization. They had altered the very lens through which humanity viewed itself. But as the truth began to emerge, a question lingered. If the council's lies could go undetected for so long, how many other truths had been hidden? How many other civilizations, cultures, and ideas had been suppressed by those in power? As the pieces of this puzzle continued to come together, one thing became increasingly clear. The council's decision to erase the civilization was not an isolated act. It was part of a much larger, ongoing effort to control the narrative of history and to ensure that only one version of the past would be remembered. What happened to the erased civilization, and why were they targeted for such an extreme act of historical manipulation? The answers were close, hidden just beneath the surface. As the lies were slowly exposed, something even more profound began to emerge, something that would cement the significance of the lost civilization in the broader narrative of history. The most tantalizing mystery was not just in the knowledge they left behind, or in the maps they created. It was the lost city itself, the beating heart of the civilization, the city that had once been the center of their world, and yet had somehow slipped from the annals of time. This city, the very symbol of the civilization's power, was not just a place of cultural and intellectual significance. It was a place of profound mystery. There were whispers of its existence for centuries, but no one had ever truly uncovered its location. According to the surviving maps and ancient texts, the city had been built with an architectural style that defied the typical methods of construction known to the time. It was said to be a marvel of engineering, constructed with materials that modern architects struggled to understand. For years, the city was written off as legend, a myth that had been exaggerated by travelers and explorers. But for those daring enough to believe otherwise, the discovery of the lost city became an obsession, a quest to find the truth beneath the layers of time. Some claimed it lay hidden beneath thick jungles. Others said it was buried under the sands of the desert. But every lead turned out to be false, as if the city itself had been made to disappear. Then came a breakthrough. A new map was discovered, one that had been overlooked in the vast archives of an ancient library. It was not a map of the world as it was known, but a map of a specific region, an area that, at first glance, seemed unremarkable. But when analyzed with the knowledge of the lost civilization's architecture and geographical understanding, the map revealed something extraordinary. It pointed to a location that had long been dismissed as uninhabited, a place where no one had dared to look. Driven by the tantalizing promise of uncovering the truth, an expedition was launched. Armed with the newly uncovered map, the team set out to find what had been lost for centuries. Days turned into weeks as they navigated treacherous terrain, dense forests, jagged cliffs, and endless desert stretches. Just when hope seemed to be fading, the explorers stumbled upon a series of ruins, half buried in the earth, but unmistakably ancient. The city, it seemed, was real. What they found was nothing short of astonishing. The ruins were not just the remnants of buildings. They were the remnants of an advanced civilization that had flourished long before the world had ever acknowledged it. The city's architecture was unlike anything the explorers had ever seen. Towering stone structures, intricately carved statues, and vast courtyards filled with symbols that had been thought to be lost to time. And within these ruins, the most significant discovery of all, vast archives containing texts and scrolls that had somehow survived the centuries of erasure. The texts uncovered in the city were a treasure trove of knowledge, maps, scientific records, and philosophical treatises that had been thought to be myths. They described everything from the principles of astronomy to the exact locations of other lost cities, to highly advanced theories of governance that had no parallel in the known world at the time. The knowledge contained within these texts was profound and revolutionary, challenging everything humanity thought it knew about the past. But the most shocking revelation came when the explorers uncovered the city's central archive, a vast chamber that contained the heart of the civilization's knowledge. Here, the cartographers had written their last, damning words. The civilization had not been erased because of its weakness, but because of its power. They had possessed knowledge too dangerous, too disruptive to the world's power structures. The city's fall was not an accident. It had been orchestrated, and the very cartographers who had worked to erase it were now the ones revealing the truth. As the explorers pieced together the ruins, they uncovered something even darker, a warning that suggested the civilization's downfall was not the result of its own actions, but rather the result of a concerted effort to destroy it. A warning that the forces that had erased them were still active, still working to ensure that the truth never reached the public. The discovery of the lost city was not just an archaeological triumph. It was a confirmation of everything that had been uncovered so far. The civilization had not vanished into the mists of time. It had been buried, hidden, and erased. And yet, here it was, standing in defiance of history itself, its secrets waiting to be revealed. But as the exploration team stood in the ruins of the lost city, another question loomed large. If the city had been erased, who had done it, and why they left such a detailed record of their crimes? The answers lay just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The lost city's discovery was not just a triumph for archaeology. It was a shocking revelation that set the stage for a global reckoning. The knowledge unearthed from the ruins sent ripples throughout the academic world and beyond. But for some, it was more than just historical intrigue. It was a call to action. The city's advanced technologies, philosophical texts, and scientific discoveries were proof that this civilization had been far ahead of its time. It had contributed to fields like astronomy, engineering, and governance in ways that modern scholars had never anticipated. But more troubling was the question that hung over all of it. Why had this civilization been erased in the first place? Among the ruins, scholars found hints that the civilization's knowledge was more than just advanced. It was subversive. The records showed that their scientists had developed technologies that could challenge the very power structures that controlled the world. Their theories about governance were radical, suggesting systems of equality and cooperation that were at odds with the hierarchical systems of the time. These were not ideas that could simply be forgotten. They were ideas that could have revolutionized the world. And yet they were buried. As the artifacts were studied and translated, it became apparent that the civilization's destruction was not simply about eliminating a threat to political power. It was about eliminating an entire way of thinking. The erased civilization had offered a worldview that questioned authority, hierarchy, and even the foundations of knowledge itself. They had dared to think outside the rigid constraints of their time, and for that, they paid the price. For those who uncovered these truths, it was clear the civilization had not simply been forgotten, it had been erased to prevent its ideas from taking root. Those in power understood that the spread of these radical ideas could topple entire empires. It was not just about controlling land or resources. It was about controlling the very way people thought about their place in the world. But as the modern world began to uncover these echoes of the past, something strange began to happen. The knowledge, once buried, started to spread. Scholars began to publish their findings, revealing the truths that had been hidden for so long. Intellectuals and revolutionaries seized upon these ideas, drawing inspiration from the lost civilization's radical theories. It was as if, after centuries of silence, the civilization's voice was finally being heard once again. The question remained, though, could these ideas truly change the world, or were they doomed to be silenced once more? Were the forces that had once erased the civilization still active today, preventing the spread of knowledge that could challenge their power? The echoes of the past were calling, louder and clearer with each new discovery. But as the modern world grappled with these revelations, a new sense of urgency began to emerge. The erasure of this civilization was not an isolated event. It was part of a much larger effort to control the flow of knowledge, to keep certain ideas from ever being realized. And now, as the knowledge began to resurface, there were those who feared what it might mean. If the truths of the lost civilization were fully understood, if their ideas were allowed to take root, it could mean the end of the status quo. The power structures that had thrived for centuries might crumble under the weight of a new, radical understanding of the world. The past had been erased, but the present was not as easily controlled. The civilization's ideas had already begun to take root in the minds of those who sought change. And with each new discovery, the truth of what had been lost, what had been buried, grew more powerful. The civilization's echoes were no longer whispers. They were a rallying cry for those who believed that history could be rewritten and that the power to shape the future lay in the hands of the people. But as the truth spread, so too did the forces that sought to suppress it. The battle for control over knowledge, for control over history, was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. It's one thing to uncover remnants of a civilization's knowledge, to piece together lost texts and ancient maps. But what if those discoveries led to something far more dangerous than anyone could have ever imagined? What if the lost civilization didn't just possess advanced technologies and ideas? They possessed something far more powerful, something that the Council had feared so much they went to great lengths to ensure it was destroyed. The deeper the researchers and explorers dug, the more disturbing their findings became. It wasn't just the scale of the civilization's advancements that was shocking. It was the revelation of a secret hidden deep within their most sacred archives, a secret so powerful that the world might never be prepared for it. It was a discovery that would change everything about history, about power, and about the very nature of human existence. Among the ruins, hidden beneath layers of earth and rubble, lay a series of stone tablets, unassuming at first, but marked with symbols and inscriptions that no one could decipher. These tablets were unlike any other artifact found in the city. Unlike the maps or texts, which were primarily focused on geography and philosophy, these tablets seemed to contain something entirely different, something that felt almost otherworldly. As experts carefully studied the tablets, they began to make a shocking discovery. The symbols were not just a written language. They were instructions. Instructions for something that could not be fully understood in the context of the civilization's other discoveries. These instructions were detailed, specific, and reference concepts far beyond the known scientific knowledge of the time. The more the scholars tried to piece together the information, the more they realized the tablets contained designs for a technology, an ancient, lost technology, that could change the course of human history. The technology described in these inscriptions wasn't just about building things or harnessing natural resources. It was something much more profound. It was a system, a device, that could manipulate the very fabric of reality, altering time, space, and even human perception. The researchers were stunned. The technology described in the tablets was far beyond anything the ancient civilization should have been able to create. The implications were staggering. If the knowledge of how to build such a device was ever made public, it could change the world in ways that no one could predict. It could destroy the foundations of power, dismantle the systems of control that had kept the world's elite in power for centuries, and potentially unlock abilities that were far beyond modern science's understanding. But there was a problem. The information was incomplete. The tablets only offered a glimpse into the technology, leaving out critical details. It was as if the civilization had known what they were creating, but had intentionally left parts of the knowledge hidden, perhaps out of fear that someone would use it recklessly, or perhaps out of a deeper understanding of its destructive potential. For the researchers, this discovery was both exhilarating and terrifying. They now held in their hands the key to one of the most significant inventions in human history, an invention that could transcend time itself. But what were they supposed to do with this knowledge? How could they ensure that it was used responsibly, if at all? The more they learned about the technology, the more they realized how dangerous it could be in the wrong hands. The Council's decision to erase this civilization wasn't just about eliminating an idea. It was about preventing the rise of something that could have torn down the world as it was known. The technology described in these tablets wasn't just a weapon. It was a means of rewriting the entire structure of existence. It was something that, if brought into the wrong hands, could reshape the very nature of humanity's reality. As the researchers struggled to understand the full scope of this discovery, they were faced with an impossible question. Should they reveal what they had found? Could the world handle such a revelation? Or was it better to bury it once more to ensure that the knowledge of this lost civilization remained hidden, where it couldn't do any harm? But there was a deeper question that none of them could answer. Had the Council's erasure truly been successful? Or had they simply delayed the inevitable? The more the researchers uncovered, the more they understood. The civilization had not disappeared. It had merely been buried, waiting for someone to dig it up again. And now, as this forbidden knowledge resurfaced, the world was faced with the ultimate challenge. What would humanity do with the power to change everything? The discovery of the ancient technology buried beneath the ruins of a lost city was a revelation that would forever alter the course of history. Yet, as the details of the ancient device began to surface, another chilling realization emerged. The forces behind the civilization's erasure were not as distant as once believed. The cartographers, who had long been thought to be a mere footnote in history, were not merely pawns in a larger game. They were the architects of a conspiracy that had rippled through time, and it seemed they had never truly disappeared. The question that haunted the researchers, explorers, and scholars was simple yet profound. Who were the cartographers? Their identity had been carefully obscured, their motives hidden beneath layers of deceit. The truth, however, was more unnerving than anyone could have imagined. As the scholars delved deeper into the records left behind by the cartographers, they began to uncover disturbing patterns. These men, who had shaped the world's maps and erased entire civilizations, were not simply working for monarchs or religious institutions. They were part of something larger, something far older than the world they had tried to control. These cartographers were members of a secret society, one that had been manipulating world events for centuries, guarding ancient knowledge that had the power to change the very nature of humanity. The ghost of the cartographers, their legacy, was alive, not in the history books or the archives, but in the hands of those who had the power to control knowledge. The secret society they belonged to, known only to a select few, had continued their work long after the civilization was erased. Their influence spread through governments, academia, and institutions of power, ensuring that the true history of the world would remain hidden. The more the researchers unearthed, the clearer it became. The erasure of the civilization was not an isolated act. It was part of an ongoing effort to suppress knowledge that could shift the balance of power. The cartographers, under the guidance of this secret society, had been the gatekeepers of a dangerous truth, one that threatened to upend the established order. As the scholars pieced together the puzzle, they uncovered references to the cartographers in ancient texts, in the margins of maps, and in cryptic symbols left behind in forgotten archives. They had been more than mapmakers. They were the custodians of a hidden truth, a truth that extended far beyond the erased civilization. The knowledge they guarded was so powerful, so disruptive, that it had been deemed too dangerous for the world to ever know. But the ghost of the cartographers was not content to remain hidden in the shadows. As the truth began to unravel, those who still held power sought to stop it from spreading. The cartographers had left a legacy of control, and the forces that had once erased the civilization now worked tirelessly to ensure that the past remained buried. Those who threatened to expose the truth were silenced, their work discredited, their discoveries erased once more. The terrifying reality was clear. The cartographers had never truly gone away. They had merely passed the torch to a new generation, one that continued to safeguard the knowledge they had worked so hard to bury. And as the search for the lost civilization's secrets grew more intense, it became clear that the ghost of the cartographers would continue to haunt the world, manipulating history from the shadows. But as the pieces of the puzzle continued to fall into place, the researchers began to ask themselves, who were these shadowy figures, and what exactly were they trying to protect? The answers, it seemed, were buried just beneath the surface of history, waiting to be uncovered, and with them, the terrifying truth about the lengths to which those in power would go to control the past. The final map was unlike any other. As the researchers uncovered it from the depths of the long-forgotten archives, it was clear that it was a masterpiece. A map so precise, so intricate, that it could not have been drawn by the hands of ordinary cartographers. This was the map of the lost civilization's final days, a map that revealed the hidden truth about their sudden disappearance and the forces behind it. Unlike the many maps that had been altered and erased over the centuries, this map was untouched, at least until it fell into the hands of the Council. It was a map of a vast network, a civilization that stretched across continents, with cities and landmarks that didn't appear on any modern map. The detail was astonishing, and what made this map truly exceptional was that it didn't just chart geography, it charted something much deeper. The map contained markings, symbols, and codes that seemed to suggest an understanding of energy, matter, and even time. The civilization had mapped not only the world around them, but also the unseen forces that governed it. Forces that, in the eyes of the cartographers, were far too dangerous to allow the world to understand. The Council had known that if this map was ever discovered, it would open the doors to unimaginable power. But there was something more disturbing about the map. It seemed to contain a hidden message, one that had been encoded in a way that only the most astute minds could decipher. It wasn't just a map of the civilization's land or trade routes. It was a map of their very downfall, a blueprint for how they had been erased from history. The final map revealed the decision of the Council to act, how they had not simply manipulated geography, but had worked behind the scenes to ensure that the civilization would be obliterated from memory. The map was an act of defiance. It was the last remaining trace of a civilization that had been destroyed, but even in its erasure, it contained a message. You cannot truly erase the past. As the scholars pieced together the meaning behind the map, they discovered that it was not just a record of where the civilization had been, it was a blueprint for where they had gone. The map suggested that the civilization's knowledge, their advancements, had not vanished into thin air. They had transcended. The civilization had found a way to move beyond the confines of physical space, to unlock the secrets of a universe that lay beyond the visible world. The message embedded in the map was clear. The civilization had not been destroyed, it had ascended. The map led to a location that had been marked as inaccessible, a place that, according to the maps of the time, didn't even exist. But now, with the map in hand, it seemed possible to find it again. As the researchers debated their next steps, one truth became clear. This map, this final creation of the lost civilization, was not just a record of the past. It was a guide to the future. The civilization had left behind a roadmap for humanity to follow, a path that would lead to the ultimate discovery of the hidden knowledge they had fought so hard to protect. The only question now was whether the world would be ready for the revelation that awaited them. Could humanity handle the knowledge that had been buried for so long? Or would the forces that had once erased the civilization rise again to stop it from reaching the public? As the map was studied further, a chilling realization set in. The final map was not just a discovery. It was the beginning of something much larger, a journey that would take humanity into realms of knowledge that had once been considered forbidden. But was it too late? Had the world already been irrevocably changed by the centuries of secrecy? The final map had opened a door, one that no one had ever truly expected to see. But as the first explorers set foot on the path laid out by the map, they discovered something even more unsettling. The journey didn't just lead them to forgotten lands. It led them to an ancient truth, one that had been hidden so deeply that even the Council had never fully grasped its significance. The lost civilization wasn't gone. It had never truly disappeared. It had merely been waiting. As the explorers ventured further along the path marked by the final map, they encountered remnants of a civilization's greatest works that had been buried under centuries of time, hidden beneath layers of history. But what truly struck them was the realization that the civilization had somehow returned. Their knowledge, their cities, their technologies had never truly been erased. Instead, they had been preserved, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The first signs of the return were small. An ancient monument rediscovered in a remote valley, a hidden library uncovered beneath the ruins of a lost city, fragments of text that had once been thought lost forever. But as the pieces fell into place, it became clear that the civilization's knowledge was not just surviving, it was thriving. Their technologies, some of which were beyond modern comprehension, were still intact, hidden away in chambers untouched by time. What the explorers had uncovered was nothing short of a revelation. The lost civilization had left behind not just a map, but a legacy that had been passed down through generations. They had known that their time on the earth was limited, that the forces of power and control would one day come for them. But they had also known that their knowledge could not be allowed to die. So they had hidden it away, not in a physical sense, but in a way that could transcend time itself. The civilization had found a way to survive beyond the physical world. They had tapped into the very essence of existence, understanding the forces that bound the universe together, and in doing so, had created a legacy that could not be erased. Their knowledge, their technologies, their philosophies had transcended time and space. They had ascended, not into oblivion, but into the fabric of reality itself, waiting for humanity to be ready to understand it. The more the explorers uncovered, the more they realized this wasn't just a rediscovery of the past. It was the beginning of a new era, one that would change everything. The civilization's knowledge, though buried for centuries, had the power to reshape the future. It could challenge everything humanity had come to believe about the world, about power, and about existence itself. But with the return of the lost civilization came new questions. How would humanity handle the knowledge they had hidden away for so long? Could the world cope with the profound changes that this discovery would bring? Or would the forces that had once erased the civilization rise again to stop it from reaching the world? As the first wave of explorers began to reveal the true extent of the lost civilization's power, the world began to take notice. Governments, corporations, and secret societies all scrambled to control the knowledge that had been hidden for so long. The race to uncover the civilization's secrets was on, but so too was the battle to suppress them. The true story of the lost civilization was no longer just a mystery. It was a battle for the future. The forces of power and control, who had once erased the civilization, would stop at nothing to ensure that their knowledge remained hidden. But as more and more of the civilization's secrets were revealed, the question became clear. Could humanity truly handle the knowledge they had kept buried for so long, or would it be too much for the world to bear? The rediscovery of the lost civilization had set off a firestorm across the globe. News outlets, academic journals, and underground movements were all abuzz with one question. What now? The profound truths uncovered, truths that had been hidden for centuries, were more than just relics of the past. They were weapons that could alter the course of history, challenge everything humanity thought it knew about its origins, and, most dangerously, disrupt the fragile balance of power that had existed for centuries. As researchers delved deeper into the civilization's records, it became clear that the knowledge they had guarded wasn't just scientific or philosophical. It was transformative. The civilization had understood principles of energy, matter, and the universe itself in ways that defied modern science. They had developed technologies that could harness and manipulate natural forces, technologies that could change the very fabric of reality. The knowledge they had preserved wasn't just about maps or geography. It was a blueprint for understanding the world on a cosmic scale. They had explored dimensions beyond the physical world, and the records they had left behind hinted at ways to access and manipulate the very forces that govern time, space, and consciousness. But as the world began to grasp the magnitude of what had been uncovered, a new challenge emerged. The very institutions that had long held control over knowledge, governments, corporations, secret societies, began to scramble to secure this newfound power for themselves. The idea that such profound secrets could fall into the hands of the general public was considered a threat to the established order. Who, after all, could be trusted with knowledge so powerful, so potentially dangerous? In the midst of this chaos, something else happened. As scholars and thinkers began to piece together the full scope of the lost civilization's achievements, they realized that they were not just rewriting history, they were redefining it. The story that had been passed down through generations was a lie, a carefully constructed narrative that had been shaped to serve the interests of those in power. The civilization, which had once been erased from the maps and the history books, had not only existed, it had thrived. And its influence had never truly disappeared. It had been suppressed, hidden, distorted, but not gone. The more the world learned, the more it became clear the civilization had never been truly erased. It had only been hidden, buried beneath a mountain of lies. The true history of humanity, of the knowledge, technologies, and ideas that had been suppressed, was beginning to emerge. And with it, the potential for a new era. But would the world be ready for such a shift? Could humanity handle the truth of its origins? The knowledge, though revolutionary, was also terrifying. It challenged everything that had been taken for granted, from religion to science to the very nature of human existence. If this knowledge were released, it would mean the end of the status quo. The old systems of power, built on secrecy and control, would no longer hold sway. and those who had spent centuries suppressing the truth would do anything to prevent it from getting out. The discovery of the lost civilization was no longer just an academic pursuit. It was a battle for control of the future. As the world teetered on the brink of a new age, the question was no longer what will we discover, but who will control the discovery. For those who had uncovered the truth, the road ahead was unclear. Would they be able to protect this knowledge and ensure that it was used for the benefit of all? Or would the forces that had once erased the civilization rise again to keep it hidden, locked away, where it could do no harm? The stage was set for a final reckoning, a battle between those who sought to preserve the status quo and those who believed in the transformative power of knowledge. As the revelations about the lost civilization continued to spread, the world found itself standing on the precipice of a monumental shift. Knowledge that had been hidden for centuries was finally being exposed, and with it came a new era of discovery. But alongside this revelation came something darker, an ominous sense of unease that spread like wildfire across the globe. The forces that had once erased the civilization from history were not about to let their hold on power slip away. The same institutions and secret societies that had spent centuries ensuring the suppression of this knowledge were now desperately working to regain control. They would stop at nothing to keep the truth from reaching the masses, and they had the resources, influence, and secrecy to do so. These forces knew that the knowledge of the lost civilization was not just transformative, it was dangerous. Its potential to disrupt the global order, to upend centuries of political, social, and economic systems, was incalculable. But what they feared most was how this knowledge could shift the balance of power. It wasn't just about the technologies the civilization had created, it was about the very philosophy that underpinned their discoveries. The lost civilization had believed in a fundamental truth, that true power lay not in domination or control, but in understanding and harmony with the world itself. For centuries, those who held power had built their empires on the premise that knowledge should be controlled, that information should be a privilege for the few. But the civilization's beliefs threatened to shatter that foundation. They had embraced a radical vision of the future, one where knowledge was shared freely and where the systems of control were broken down in favor of collective progress. This vision was a direct challenge to everything the world's power structures had worked to build. And so, in the face of this growing threat, the world's elites had no choice but to act. They couldn't afford to let the knowledge of the lost civilization spread beyond the small, controlled circles of academia or underground movements. They had to ensure that it remained buried, once more, by any means necessary. But as history has shown time and time again, the truth is not so easily contained. The more the world's power brokers tried to suppress the knowledge, the more it began to spread. Researchers, activists, and even ordinary citizens, armed with the fragments of knowledge uncovered from the ruins, began to challenge the official narrative, demanding answers, pushing back against the systems that sought to control them. The idea of a new world, one built on transparency, cooperation, and shared knowledge, had begun to take root. The question, however, was whether humanity would be able to handle the profound implications of this knowledge. Could the world embrace the changes it would bring, or would the forces that had once erased the civilization succeed in locking away the truth once more? Those who had uncovered the civilization's secrets now faced a choice that weighed heavily on their consciences. Should they continue to fight for the truth, even at the risk of their lives and reputations? Or should they walk away, allowing the powerful forces to silence the past once again? The cost of silence was clear. The price of burying the truth was the continued suppression of progress, the perpetuation of a system that kept the masses in the dark, while the elite controlled the flow of information. But the cost of speaking out was just as high. To expose the full truth could ignite a revolution, a worldwide upheaval that would challenge not only the structures of power, but the very way humanity viewed its place in the universe. For those who had uncovered the lost civilization's knowledge, the stakes were impossibly high. The truth was powerful, but it was also dangerous. It had the potential to change everything. And now, as the world stood at the edge of a new era, the ultimate question remained. Who would control the future, and would humanity be ready to face the truth? As the world's awareness of a lost civilization grew, so did the realization that this wasn't simply a case of historical rediscovery. The civilization's knowledge, and the attempt to suppress it, was part of a larger, more sinister conspiracy that had been orchestrated over centuries. Those who had first erased the civilization were merely pawns in a much grander scheme, one that had been in motion long before the mapmakers began their work. The conspiracy's origins were buried in the annals of history, hidden in plain sight. For centuries, powerful elites, secret societies, and hidden networks of influence had worked behind the scenes to manipulate the course of human civilization. They understood that knowledge was the most potent form of power. The ability to control information, whether about science, technology, or history, meant the ability to control the future. The cartographers, it seemed, were not just rewriting geography. They were also shaping the very narrative of human progress, hiding away dangerous knowledge that could alter the power dynamics of the world. And the forces behind them, the conspiracy that had orchestrated the erasure of the civilization, were not acting out of fear of this specific civilization. They were acting out of fear of what would happen if humanity ever learned how to use the knowledge the civilization had left behind. The deeper the researchers dug into the conspiracy, the more it became apparent that it had ties to some of the world's most influential institutions, those that had claimed dominion over knowledge for centuries. The conspiracy had infiltrated universities, royal courts, religious institutions, and even secret governmental agencies. It was a web of power built on the suppression of ideas that could destabilize the current order. And the people behind it weren't just seeking to control knowledge. They were seeking to control the very flow of time itself. The civilization had discovered things that could alter the natural course of human evolution, things that could open doors to entirely new ways of understanding reality. The conspiracy's greatest fear wasn't just that the civilization's technological advancements would lead to a new era of power. It was that humanity would unlock the secrets of existence itself. The lost civilization's maps, their texts, their teachings, they weren't just a catalog of geography or philosophy. They were instructions on how to harness the hidden forces of a universe. This was the knowledge that had been hidden away, and it was far more dangerous than any weapon. It was the key to unlocking a new era of human consciousness, one where people could manipulate space and time, where the constraints of reality itself could be bent. But as with all great conspiracies, the deeper the researchers went, the more they uncovered, and the more they realized just how far the forces behind the conspiracy would go to stop them. The secrets of a civilization were powerful, yes, but they were also unstable. And those who had kept them hidden for so long understood that if the knowledge was ever fully revealed, it could cause irreparable harm. The balance of power could collapse. The world would be irrevocably changed. The conspiracy had done everything in its power to bury the truth, from rewriting history to controlling the flow of information. And yet, despite their best efforts, the civilization's knowledge was now out in the open. What had been buried for centuries was beginning to surface, and the forces that had once controlled the past were now desperate to regain control of the future. The question was no longer whether the truth would be uncovered. It was whether the world could handle it. Could humanity be trusted with the knowledge of the lost civilization? Or would the forces of power strike again, determined to ensure that the truth remained hidden? As the final pieces of the conspiracy were revealed, one thing became clear. The battle for humanity's future was just beginning. The lost civilization's knowledge had resurfaced, and with it came the maps, the final, irrefutable proof that everything had been hidden. What had once been buried beneath layers of deception was now within reach. But as scholars and explorers pieced together the maps, something unsettling became clear. These were not just geographical maps. They were more than simple depictions of terrain, rivers, and cities. These maps were like keys, keys that unlocked something deeper, something hidden in the fabric of existence itself. The final map, more intricate than any previously discovered, held the answers. It wasn't just about physical locations. It was a map of forces, of hidden knowledge that the civilization had possessed. The map indicated sites of immense importance, not only those of geographical significance, but locations of metaphysical power, places that aligned with celestial bodies, spots where the laws of nature itself could be altered. The discovery of the final map was momentous, but it also sparked a wave of fear and fascination across the world. This map wasn't something that could be kept secret for long. Governments, private organizations, and secret societies alike were racing to understand its meaning, each group vying for control over what could potentially be the most powerful discovery in human history. For the first time in centuries, the true knowledge of the lost civilization was within grasp. The map's directions led to more than just physical locations. They pointed to the very essence of a universe, the principles of energy and matter that the civilization had mastered. These were not just ideas. They were pathways to altering reality itself. As the explorers decoded the map, they found references to ancient symbols that had once been dismissed as mythical. These symbols were now understood as representations of concepts far beyond contemporary science, symbols that related to quantum forces, the nature of time, and the potential for human consciousness to manipulate these forces. The civilization had known things that modern science was just beginning to theorize, and they had used their knowledge to transcend the limits of the physical world. The most chilling aspect of the map was its final location, a place marked only as the Nexus. The Nexus was described in cryptic terms, as if the civilization had left behind a warning. The map indicated that this location was not just a physical place. It was the intersection of multiple dimensions, a point where reality itself could be altered. The exact nature of the Nexus was unclear, but one thing was certain. It held the key to unlocking the full potential of the civilization's knowledge. The discovery of the Nexus raised immediate concerns. If such a place existed, what power lay within it? Could humanity handle the implications of what the civilization had left behind? The forces behind the original erasure of the civilization had feared the discovery of this very map. And now, with its location revealed, the world stood at the edge of a new era, an era where the lines between reality and possibility could be blurred. But as the map was studied, a warning echoed from the past. Some knowledge is too powerful to wield, and some truths are too dangerous to reveal. What lay ahead was unknown, but what was clear was this: the battle for control over the Nexus had begun, and whoever controlled it would hold the fate of humanity in their hands. The map had led the way. It had uncovered the Nexus, the heart of the lost civilization's most dangerous secret, a location that could alter the very fabric of reality. As news of the discovery spread, the world's most powerful institutions, from governments to corporate giants, scrambled to stake their claim on the knowledge that lay within the Nexus. But with each step closer to unlocking its power, it became clear that the price of this knowledge was far greater than anyone had imagined. The race to reach the Nexus was not just a physical one. It was a battle for the very soul of humanity. Those who sought to control it didn't just want the civilization's lost technologies. They wanted the ability to reshape the world itself, to bend the laws of nature and time to their will. But as the world's elite and shadowy organizations mobilized, a chilling realization set in. The civilization had hidden this power for a reason. The closer researchers and explorers got to the Nexus, the more strange occurrences began to unfold. The further they delved into the ancient texts and artifacts, the more they realized the civilization had understood the dangers of this power. The knowledge they had so carefully guarded was not just a weapon. It was a force of nature that could alter the very core of existence. And it came with a price. As the first expedition reached the site of the Nexus, they uncovered a hidden chamber, inscribed with warnings from the civilization itself. The inscriptions were cryptic but clear. The power of the Nexus is not to be wielded lightly. It has the ability to reshape not only the physical world, but the very laws of time, space, and consciousness. The price of using this knowledge is the destruction of the balance that holds everything together. The explorers hesitated, knowing that their discovery was not just monumental, it was dangerous. For what they had uncovered wasn't just the key to understanding the universe. It was a Pandora's box, one that could release chaos and destruction on an unimaginable scale. And yet, despite the warnings, the pull of power was too great. Governments, corporations, and powerful individuals pushed forward, each determined to harness the civilization's knowledge for their own gain. Some sought to control energy, others to manipulate time itself, while a few wanted to use the knowledge to reshape society and create a new world order. But as the world moved closer to unlocking the full potential of the Nexus, strange things began to happen. Those who delved too deep into the knowledge began to lose their grip on reality. Time seemed to warp around them, and those who used the technology began experiencing phenomena that defied explanation. Memories altered, visions of alternate realities, and moments where the laws of physics no longer seemed to apply. It became clear that the civilization had not just hidden this knowledge, they had buried it, knowing the dangers it posed. The civilization's rise and fall were tied to the same forces they had discovered, forces that, if unleashed, could unravel the very fabric of existence itself. Now, as the world stood on the brink of a new age, the question remained, was humanity ready to bear the cost of this knowledge? Could they handle the power that the civilization had hidden, or would they, like the civilization before them, be consumed by it? The race for the Nexus had only just begun, and the forces behind the knowledge were far from finished. Those who controlled it could change the world forever or destroy it. The price of knowledge, it seemed, was not just power. It was everything.